Welcome, everyone. I can just see some participants trickling through from the waiting room. I'm going to let that process play out for a second and then we'll get started. Bear with us for 1 second, please. There we go. Okay. What- Welcome, everyone, to another in our series of meetings with mayors. My name is Dr. Simon Kay. I'm Policy Director at the think tank Restate. I'm delighted to be joined by Helen Godwin, who's the Mayor of the West of England. Very quick note from me about this series. Mayors are a massively disruptive and interesting new force in English politics and policy. With a directly elected basis, they have a different mandate, a different level of legitimacy to take action. They have a different kind of relationship with voters, and they operate in ways that we can't necessarily predict based on the representative models that we've seen in local government and national government in the past. A new species of politician, if you like. I'm not sure how you feel about being described as a new species. Apologies for that.
I'll take
It just came out that way. So in this series, we try to learn more about them by talking to them, and we've had a really great series of conversations so far, and it's brilliant now to be inviting Helen to join our gallery of mayors. And all of those conversations are available to watch online. All of this is part of our big Reimagining the Local State program. Do check us out and get in touch if you have any thoughts. But our real purpose with that is to ask the sort of unquestioned assumptions, to interrogate them really hard as devolution and local government policy enters a real state of change in the years to come. So with no further ado, massive welcome to you, Helen Godwin.
Thank
Let me
you.
start, as I usually do, by asking you what made you want to be a mayor and why the mayor of the West of England specifically.
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you very much for having me. It's lovely to be here. It's lovely to have the time to engage in a proper long form conversation. So thank you. I think probably I would start by saying, like a lot of women, I had to be encouraged to put myself forward to be a mayor. I hadn't. There's a bit of a sort of long tail to the story in that I was previously a councillor in Bristol and served in the cabinet of the former mayor of Bristol. So the West of England had a unique situation where we had a city mayor, and then we from 2012, and then we introduced a regional mayor from 2017. So at one point, along with the various Lord mayors, we had rather a lot of mayors, which wasn't an ideal situation. And then I stood down from politics in 2021 and returned to work in the private sector, and honestly did think that my kind of political days were done. And was quite content with that. Had really enjoyed my time in politics, but thought that that was it. And then I suppose over the course of the next sort of 2-3 years, people started to talk about this role, what might be possible with this role. I had previously gone for an internal Labour Party selection for this role, but lost it to the previous mayor, Dan Norris. And a lot of people, there was a lot of, it would have been different if you'd won, etc., etc. But that's very flattering and kind, isn't it? But you don't necessarily go, okay, I'm going to do it then. Until really last summer, so early in 2024, I was lucky enough in my paid work life to go and do some work for Greater Manchester Combined Authority, where we worked with Andy Burnham's team on designing the Manchester Baccalaureate. And actually, it was spending time in Manchester at the tail end of the last Tory government and getting a real sense in Manchester, not only that things were happening from a kind of infrastructure perspective, and that clearly there was, dynamic leadership there, but that it didn't feel as if, as a place, it was beholden to what was happening in Westminster. So at that point, people were very fed up with the government, really frustrated by the lack of progress, frustrated by the kind of mistakes that the government were continually making. But when I went to Manchester, it just felt like I was in Manchester and it wasn't being dragged down by some of that. And I thought that was really interesting. And obviously what struck me was that wasn't the case here and never had been. And it didn't show any signs of sort of going that way. So I guess that planted a seed, and then the rest of it is a series of events. So Dan got elected to Parliament. which meant then at the Labour Party conference, September 24, that we obviously then won the election. September 24, there was a ruling that you couldn't be a mayor and an MP. And then that opened up a sort of selection. And genuinely, I sort of threw my name in the hat and was definitely the outsider, because I hadn't been in that kind of a very close-knit world of Labour politics in Bristol and the area for a good few years. So a lot of people didn't know me, didn't thought I'd sort of had been and gone or whatever. So yeah, and then it all escalated quite quickly. And in terms of why Weka, it couldn't be anywhere else, because the west of England is home. So I'm a Bristolian. My entire family live in the region. I've got a very boring family tree, which doesn't take you far away from the region, unfortunately. So I am as West Country as you can get. So I definitely couldn't do this anywhere else. And I think that is, I'm sure we'll come on to it, but I think that is a real important feature of mayors as well, actually, that plays out quite strongly.
I think you're right. There's something about how embedded in a place a mayor is seems to have a really big bearing on how they do and how viable their candidacy is. But I think there's also something you're saying about the outsider status, isn't there? There seems to be the kind of role where people can kind of break through and take on that role from a variety of different backgrounds. And clearly you thought of yourself as an outsider, and now you're in the seat. There's a sort of a value to that, isn't there? Having that slightly outside or left field perspective.
Yeah, I think so, almost definitely. I think the role of a regional mayor is not well understood, and the stakeholder landscape isn't well understood. And so if you come into this as a kind of very tribal party politician, I think one might struggle, because my kind of day-to-day stakeholders now are the universities, business leaders, investors, the health system, all sorts of people, as well as obviously government. And it definitely helps, that the government is the same colour as me, because that enables us to kind of have direct contact in a way that I don't think we would have otherwise. But yeah, I think if you come in as a kind of somebody who's in the minutiae of the governance of local government, and is a kind of wants to spend more time in that than kind of making progress and finding ways, frankly, to kind of speed things up, then I don't think you can get as much done. And it's definitely not the same as being an MP in terms of that kind of almost, there's a ceremonial element, isn't there, to being an MP, as well as the sort of legislative stuff that's really important that happens in Parliament. I think when MPs are often back in their constituency, it's quite civic. Whereas this isn't. I go to work it's a job. I go to work. I have meetings that lead to things happening, and then we sort of follow that through. So it's quite functional, really, as a role.
And I think that's something that isn't really that well understood about the nature of being a mayor of a combined or a strategic authority. You're reminding me of something that Claire Ward said to us right when we started this series, which is that it became clear as we were talking, she really doesn't think of herself as part of local government. Now, that's actually kind of an interesting and slightly controversial perspective, isn't it? Because a combined authority is the combination of a bunch of local authorities working together. So, and of course, she was coming from having been an MP herself. So,
Yes.
somewhere where you're not really national, you're a representative in a different sort of a way, you have a role interacting with, but are not of local government. It's really hard to define this in the minds of voters or anyone else, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it is really difficult, and you're right. The engagement that we have with the unitary authorities is really important, and actually we can't get much done or anything done in some cases without them. Like, we have a governance process that we have to follow. I think I'm lucky in that I'm sort of coming to this when there are already 14, there were already 10 mayors. So there's obviously obvious examples of people that I can look to and think, well, I like how they've done that bit and how others have done other bits. And then you just have to sort of tailor it to your place. But I think it's I think it's an interesting one. Certainly from a sort of party political point of view, it's interesting, because how do you campaign for a mayor is also challenging, because certainly in the Labour Party, we're very used to kind of door knocking is king, and you go out and knock on as many doors. Now, I think I cover 9 constituencies in my region. I have a feeling Claire covers something ridiculous like 22. So, the ability for her to go and knock on all of those doors and be that sort of local politician is really restricted. And so I think how we communicate, so digital comms, I think, is super important for us as mayors. So it's how do we get the messages out far and wide? And I think, there isn't necessarily a playbook for how you do that. So that's kind of something that I think we're all sort of learning and trying to figure out. But it's keeping those relationships. We need to keep the relationships with the combined authorities, and we need to be representing their views. We also need obviously the MPs to be working with us and us supporting them so that we can lobby and make the best case for our places. And then we need to hold really strong relationships with government so that we can tell the story and try and draw down the funding to support what we want to do. So, yeah, you've got to be sort of pretty agile. And I think in terms of where that lands, I think speaking plain English is really important. And I think actually when I sit around the mayoral council with all the mayors, one thing that really strikes me is that we all do speak very plain English. To each other, to the government, and actually to the people that we represent. And I think that we're slightly sort of freer in our ability to do that.
You referred there at the start to the necessity of getting that governance side right. That, I think, leads us to the most obvious question in the world when we're talking about WECA, which is that WECA has had a really complicated story, hasn't it, so far? I mean, it's from a similar cohort to a lot of the older combined authorities. None of them are very old, but it popped up in 2017, I think.
Yeah.
About the same age as Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And there have been challenges around leadership, challenges about the internal friction on the combined authority board at times, I think. In fact, a best value notice, I think, was in effect through most of 2024 last year. Which was about the nature of the constitution, the state of governance, the difficult relationships within the board between the mayor and the constituent authorities. So, I mean, that's not a question yet. Let me try and put you one. This is a really hard job for someone in your position right now. To what extent do you feel that you're picking up the pieces of something and trying to bring the platform you've been handed to something more? What's your reflection on all of that? And what do you think it'll take to move past that difficult period and to sort of take WECA forward?
Yeah, so I think my first reflection on that is as a resident, actually, is of someone that lives here, that has family here, is bringing up my kids here, and I feel hard done by to a degree because, as I said at the beginning, I see what other places have done through devolution, and one of the things that was very stark when we were knocking on doors last spring was that some people didn't know what WECA was, and there really wasn't any track record to go on. There was nothing for me to say. What I ended up doing was talking about Andy Burnham on the doors more than I talked about any previous mayor of this combined authority, because I needed to spark people's imagination about what was possible here. And I couldn't do that using that track record. So that kind of says it all, really, that we have wasted, in my view, 8 years where we could have been really making the case for the West of England, securing investment and making a difference to other people, to everyone's lives, and that wasn't done. So there is a fair bit of kind of annoyance, I suppose. What that means in terms of what I now have to do. So on the one hand, it was a very low bar. So being, frankly, in the office every day, as I am, talking to staff, smiling, as I do quite often, and, trying to create a culture where we can get stuff done and we're working in collaboration, both in the organisation and with our unitary authority partners is something new. So, it shouldn't be, right? So that's a quick win. What gets harder is that has left scars. So that I would say as a place or an organisation, it was quite an anxious organisation that I came into, because there was a culture of not knowing what the mayor was thinking, or was the mayor absent, or whatever. So I've, that takes time to heal. That's not just kind of a one and done. And then I think the really interesting thing for me, which is also increasingly, if I'm being really candid, sort of a source of frustration, is that there is a very long tail from this 8 years of inactivity, in the sense that we, despite being 8 years old, are not considered an established combined authority, and we cannot overcome that until we've been out of best value notice for 18 months, which means we cannot do anything about that until next September, which means we cannot move towards an integrated settlement, which means we cannot spend the money in the way that we would really want to, or do more with that money, or make that money work harder. And it's public money and it's for the public. We can't do any of that until we've got over this kind of hurdle. We also have a legacy whereby the previous mayor had certain topics that he was very interested in, and other topics that he didn't want to engage with. And so that leaves us in a kind of bit of a chasm, really, in terms of some of the funding pots that go out to other mayoralties, and we just don't get them because we weren't in the original round, or whatever. So there's a really, I mean, you can probably hear in my voice, there's a really, there's a series of kind of very frustrating things that have happened in the past, which I am really trying very hard to kind of overcome. But obviously we're talking about government, and things move at a pace that they move at, and and there's also assurance that the government needs about how that money will be spent, and I completely understand and accept that. But it's just trying to get those moving parts in place in a world where politics moves so fast, and your period of grace is so much shorter than it ever was. So I am very conscious that I want to deliver, and I want to be a really good partner to government on things like house building, or improving public transport, and all of these things that government also want to do. But some of those restrictions from that previous world are kind of slowing us down in a way that sort of on paper just feels really difficult. So it's not that legacy is there's some really serious things in there, actually, in terms of that people should rightly feel sort of frustrated about that. So then another big job that I've got is to try and improve the reputation of the role, and also of the combined authority, and demonstrate to people that it is worth having, that devolution can work for us. So there's a lot to do.
I mean, yeah. Well, yeah, that sounds like an enormous amount to do. And I mean, I'm the one who used this phrase, but the process of picking up those pieces and shaping something from it, that's a lot. And I think there's something in the kind of the frankness of the answer you just gave that sends a bit of a signal about your approach to that, which is just to look at it head on and to be very direct about it. So I wonder if there's something that connects back to your earlier answer about the nature of the mayoral role and being a kind of straight talker that helps here. I wonder about this point about the 8 wasted years, as you put it, and the way that the system, in some ways, because, and let's face it, government is government, it's not particularly dynamic how it responds to these situations. One of the frustrations here might be, beyond the kind of the 8 wasted years, the fact that the system is now continuing to punish you guys by saying, well, no, you've got to wait another 18 months. No, wait, you can't just jump into these funding streams. There's a whole process you have to get in at the beginning station. You can't join the train halfway down the track, as it were. You've got to wait for your established status. No, we've got to approve that in a different process. Does some of this experience tell you that we need to start clearing away some of those stops and checks and interruptions and slownesses? Do we need a more dynamic system?
Yeah, I mean, it's complex, isn't it? Because those systems have to be in place to make sure that when we've got, if we have bad actors, or we have people that are not doing the job for the right reasons, or not spending public money well, that there are sort of stage gates, and there is the correct governance to prevent that from happening. Because what it all goes back to is this is public money, right? So I kind of respect that we need to have that in place. so it's a difficult one to answer, because from my position, I know my intentions are good, and I know that I'm interested in one thing, and that is delivery. So of course, from my perspective, rip off everything and let me crack on. That's the ask. But there will be other mayors who don't, maybe aren't doing that, or don't have those same intentions, or maybe they do but they don't want to work to the same rules, and so so you've got to have something in place, and I think that's right. And as we move to a place where we're going to have more and more mayors, then in a way governance needs to be even stronger around that. I think there is, and the other thing I would say as well is that as mayors we get really good access to senior government ministers and secretaries of state in a way that I was actually surprised at how much access that we do get, and the quality of those conversations, and the ability to really kind of talk things through. So I wouldn't want it to come across as if it's a very kind of at arm's length, just follow the process. There's a real mix in there, but I just think there's not an example like this anywhere else, and so fitting into a system when your story is different is always going to be a bit trickier, really. And I'm probably just trying to use force of personality to find the workarounds at the moment. But that's interesting in itself. And we are getting some small wins, so it's good.
That's good. Well, I want to ask you about some of those wins in a second. Well, actually, let me ask you now, because someone wrote to me this morning when they noted that we were having this event, and said, you have to ask her about the child poverty strategy. It's really innovative. It's really different. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So that is something that we're doing. It's come from here. I mean, I was kind of on the fringes, I have to say, on the fringes, because there was some incredible work that went into the campaign to lift the two-child poverty cap, two-child benefit cap. And that was something that I felt extremely passionate about from a values perspective. My region doesn't come at the top of those lists, when you see X number of children in poverty, but that really doesn't matter, because as long as we've got any children in poverty, then that's something that I believe as a Labour politician that I need to be trying to act on and pull the levers that I can. So my background, as I said before, I served in cabinet for the previous mayor of Bristol, but my portfolio was children and young people. So I had children's social care, I had education, I had skills, and I also asked for women to be added to that portfolio, because we did some work around domestic violence, and we couldn't support young people unless we were helping their mums, because there's this horrendous stat that 100% of boys that are in care from the age of 14 will have lived with or witnessed domestic violence. So we tried to sort of pull all that together so that we could take some action. So I was always going to come into this with that lens of having had that background in children's services, and I do really believe that if we're going to do something, we should start with kids, because that's how we safeguard something, a good activity for 20 years. And see Short Start is probably the best example we've got, isn't it, in modern times around that. So the child poverty strategy is essentially an attempt for us to look at all of the potential levers that we've got. So the powers that I've got around transport, around skills, and around the sort of periphery soft power, convening powers. How could we pull all of that together and then start to build that into a child poverty action plan? So it's really important that it's not a strategy, it's an action plan. So there will be, when we launch it later this month, there will be tangible things that we are going to do. It's quite innovative in the sense that we are looking at the sort of powers that mayors have, but through a different lens. So we're pulling out those powers. So the best example I can give you is Kids Go Free. So over the summer holidays, we enabled all kids under the age of 16 to travel for free on our buses across the whole region. I think 910,000 journeys were taken. So it had a significant impact. We've got 150,000 kids. So that was big. And what that enabled, and the University of Bristol did some evaluation on it, And in the areas where we've got the most child poverty and we've got the least good outcomes for our children, are also some of the most poorly connected areas. So we were able to evaluate some of that. And it was just about kids getting out, getting access to the city or to the surrounding area or to the seaside in a way that they hadn't been able to before. And it was about parents being able to say, well, actually, yes, I can take them to that museum now because the whole day is free. Whereas before, it was still going to be a 15-20 quid day, for example. So it's about using what have we got? What have I got in my kind of armory that I can play around with and turn that into something that will start us on our journey to alleviating child poverty across our region. But I'm not the first mayor to do this. I should say, Kim McGuinness has done this. She's done it in a slightly different way. She's probably gone down more the investment fund route and kind of lots of funding pots. Whereas I think at this first sort of level, we're looking at the money that we've already got and just trying to sort of reallocate some of that so that we're sort of focusing on this sort of North Star, really.
I think that the process you just described is so interesting, and it feels like, particularly when your combined authority is at the stage that yours is at, there's an instinctive or an automatic deferral to the whole place approach, where you say, what's the challenge? What do we want to put our time and thought into? What tools, what budget, what resource do we actually have? And how can we, it's a problem solving process, really.
Yeah.
And it strikes me that not everyone would be very good at that. Where what you might be really doing is saying, well, actually, no, we really do need to get to established status where we have far more clear pathways. But actually, you're sort of in Apollo 13 mode. You're trying to fix the thing on the ship with the thing you have available to you. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're also working very hard to get to established status as well. So we know where, the purpose of the organisation at the moment is to get us to established status, and so that's the kind of ask of the organisation. And there's lots of internal operating model type things happening to kind of get us where we need to get to. But I suppose back to my earlier point, we're in a febrile environment politically. I can't sit in this chair and say, when we get established status, I'm going to do all of this, because who's going to listen and who's going to care, frankly, because it's like, well, what are you being paid for now? So I really, I'm not somebody that kind of has a problem with retail politics. Like, I'm quite happy, I've lived a long enough life to know the messages I take away from things like a budget or an autumn statement are the kind of the very quick package things that make sense to everybody. So I think we sometimes over intellectualize politics, and the more discourse there is about it, the more we need to find things that maybe aren't there. Like, the reality is, people feel a lack of hope. They feel like things aren't getting better and no one's had a pay rise for 15 years. And that's it. That's where we're at as a country. And we've made some catastrophic mistakes that have kind of embedded that. And so if the first thing I did was to say to families, summer holidays are coming, we've got the Wallace and Gromit Trail, we all love it, let's make the buses free for kids. That's a no-brainer, right? And people go, oh, yeah, she did that. And it's fine. And I'm happy because it's, they can see that I'm doing something, but genuinely they're happy, and, the kids are getting out and about, and that's healthy and good for their mental health. And maybe even, help some of those kids that are struggling with anxiety or feeling like, how do you operate in an environment today? And that, a lot of that hangover from COVID is still around, as we know. So I'm really comfortable with kind of using whatever I can to move things on.
No, that's really helpful. I feel very seen by your over intellectualizing politics comment.
That wasn't a dig.
That's definitely a foible for some people who will remain nameless, even though it's obviously me. There's too many questions still to ask you, and I'm conscious we've only got 10 minutes on the clock. So let me give you a chance, first of all, to talk about one of the ways in which WECA is going to change really soon that we know about, which is the move toward expansion with North Somerset joining. How's that going to change? Do you think this is WECA finally becoming the size that it always should have been? Do you think this is now going to be the right size for WECA?
Yeah, I do. I mean, the North Somerset question is obviously another, complicated chapter in our history, and that it was supposed to, the whole thing is designed to have North Somerset in it, and there was a sort of last minute move not to have North Somerset in, and that's left us in this kind of slightly strange shape where we have a joint committee that North Somerset come to, and then we have a committee that they don't, and there are various things we use. So it's not Go Free point, but Kids Go Free does operate in North Somerset, for example. So some of what we do already covers that wider boundary. And so what was interesting is that during the election campaign this time, every single candidate was pro North Somerset coming in. So it kind of diffused it as an issue because everyone said, yes, of course it makes sense. So now we're just in the tricky bit, frankly, of negotiating with government, getting to a point where we've got an offer to say to residents, here's the offer, we'll put it out to consultation, and North Somerset will decide whether that's something that they want to then commit to. And obviously, and really importantly, the other unitary authorities will decide if they're comfortable with that offer, and then North Somerset coming in. So again, it's relatively straightforward. I think our growth strategy that we launched in September, that includes North Somerset, and we talk very passionately about the growth zone that sits in North Somerset, that's part of our kind of 5 growth zones. Our port, for example, sits half in Bristol, half in North Somerset. Our airport is in North Somerset. Weston-super-Mare, which is like our probably 3rd biggest area population, that's in North Somerset. So yeah, there's a logic to it, but because it wasn't done right in the past, it's now more complex than it needs to be. So we need to just get through that process, and if everyone is happy, as I hope they will be, we can move on and operate as the area that we should be. There's obviously, the question of further expansion, I don't think would exist if the government hadn't come in and said, we want to kind of have a patchwork of mayors all across the country, because that does then raise other questions and conversations. And I think there are other areas where you could actually make an economic case that, that we should be one big sort of super area. But politically, that's not such a good case, probably, if I'm being, again, candid. But let's get the North Somerset thing sorted first, I think. It's my main priority. We're worrying about anywhere else.
Make it the main thing for now. I think it sounds smart. Let me ask you then to do something that I think in your specific position right now is doubly difficult, which is to sort of engage with the debate that's emerging now about the future of devolution across the country. I mean, I'm sure from your various roles and now in your current role, you'll have a view on this. Obviously, big powers on the way for established mayoral strategic authorities. You're on the pathway to try and bring those in. But beyond that, I think one of the meetings I had yesterday confirmed this for me. We don't really have a clear picture of the future of devolution, of what the next level of devolution ought to be, how extensive it should be. What's Devo max for mayors across England if and when all the strategic authorities and mayors appear across the map of England? Do you have a view on that? What's missing from the picture?
Yeah, I think, I do have a view on it. And I mean, the first thing I'll say is obviously, working closely with the other mayors, I've got enormous respect for all of them. And as I've said before about the kind of way that we communicate, but also, that passion for place and that commitment to place is really key. And so when Andy or Sadiq or Steve or Tracy or Kim talk about their places, they know what they're talking about, and they're speaking for their places. I really believe that. So that those additional asks are not about they're not about a power grab or give us this, give us that. It's because they know that those additional asks will make the change to their residents. So one of the big things that we've been lobbying on, certainly since I was elected in May, is around the overnight tourism levy, which obviously was in the budget last week. And I think, to be honest, some people probably outside of combined authorities didn't think that was a goer, like probably thought that government wouldn't say yes to that. But I think that will enable, when we've had conversations with Chief Secretary to the Treasury about it, everyone came back with really practical ideas around spending that money in a way that would support the government's aims, but would also mean a lot to those places. So whether that's looking at improving the place infrastructure, around our tourist centres, or whether it's about supporting those people who make that sector work. So people, in the nighttime economy, transport to get them home, that's something that I'm particularly interested in. And also, how do we support hospitality businesses who have had it really, really tough? Can we leverage some of that money back in? So I think that the overnight tourism levy is a really good example of where devolution could take us. The other big thing for me, and this is something that I was asked before I was elected, if you could have another power, what would it be? And my answer still remains the same, actually, sort of 6 months in, is around post-16 education. So it's not about A levels. It's not about the kids that are staying on in sixth form and doing A levels, going to university, but we have, skills along with transport and housing are the three barriers to growth here in the west of England. We don't have neat figures, so we don't have youth employment figures that are terrifying in that they are in some places, but we do have pockets of that. And obviously you won't be surprised to hear they're the same places where the pockets of child poverty are. So, let's get the child poverty stuff right, and this all starts to feed through. But we have huge opportunities here around urban regeneration, around house building, around transport infrastructure, and around the future economy. So whether that's clean energy or digital and tech or the creative industries, loads of opportunities. But what we don't have is skills pathways to get those young people lined up and in those jobs. And I think that by having more powers around post-16 and being able to make those connections in a way that, frankly, I think only a mayor can, and that can only be done at regional level, between the employers, the colleges, the schools, and the young people and their families, we could start to define some really exciting pathways that would enable young people to see their future in their region in a way that I think we've sort of lost. And the thing that I kind of draw on is, if I think about just over the water in South Wales, those mining communities, people weren't elated to go down into a dangerous mine every day. But what they felt was that they were contributing to something bigger, and there was a social infrastructure that sort of sat around that made those places really, really important, but brought pride. And so there's something for me about, if we can get young people engaged and seeing how they're contributing to their place through really effective skills pathways that take them into the sectors that we've defined as important for our region, that becomes quite a powerful ecosystem, and it starts to help to answer some of those really difficult questions that we've got around populism, around where do young people see their place in society, that apathy, that lack of hope, and all of those things.
Looks like you're going to get your wish, perhaps, on the post-16 stuff. Looks like the amendment is going to get affirmed in the EDCE bill, which could enable that. We're into our last minute and a half here. Let me ask my traditional closer. What's your big piece of advice, your big lesson that you would share with someone who's looking at becoming a mayor for the first time?
Make sure you do it for the right reasons, I think. So don't do it as a sort of career path, or as the MPs are all not going anywhere, so I'll be a mayor instead. I think it's a very different skill set. It's a very different job, and just do it if you are somebody that can bring people together, prepared to work in partnership, but you can't have a hierarchy. It needs to be, I describe myself as part of a patchwork. The region, is made up of lots of different squares. I'm just one of them, but I need to be connected with all those others, and then together I really think then we can push things forward. So I think you have to come at it from that perspective, rather than kind of seeing yourself as, queen of the castle.
All right, brilliant note to end on, and what a treat it's been to talk to you. Thank you so much, Helen, for making the time for this. And for all those tuned in or watching this as streaming, there's loads of other conversations with mayors and other figures across local government as part of the reimagining the local state work stream. Please do check out the rest of our content. And Helen, thank you so much for joining us.
Not at all. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye bye.